Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. ASEAN is at a pivotal moment in its energy transition journey, with countries across the region setting ambitious goals to decarbonize their economies. Now, Malaysia too has committed to significant reforms. But how do we stack up against our neighbours? And as we assume the chair of ASEAN, what role can we play in driving a coordinated regional effort towards energy transition? So joining me on the show today to discuss all of this further is Kavita Gandhi. She is the Executive Director of the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore. Kavita, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm hoping we can kind of kick off our conversation, maybe learning a little bit more about the Singapore Energy Association of Singapore, the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore. I mean, maybe you can tell us the kind of work that you do, and also I've been following the survey, the results of the survey that you had recently done with regional industry professionals. So maybe talk a little bit about the organization and also the survey.
Wonderful, Melissa. Thank you firstly for having me. The Sustainable Energy Association is a not-for-profit. It was set up in 2006. We have about 250 corporates that are members. And our effort is to really help these companies grow, and also at the same time meeting the Singapore net zero ambition by 2050. So these companies are across the value chain of energy. So all the way from energy efficiency to solar, biomass, biogas, carbon, green hydrogen, carbon management, electric vehicles, you name it, and we have it. And what do we do? Basically, our role is to help grow this sector. So we use a few strategies. I like to put it in two buckets. One is more the developmental side of things, where we work very closely with the government and our standards bodies in developing new standards, give our input for policies, have dialogue session with the government agencies, come up with white papers to, position our thought leadership, because our members have a lot of collective knowledge that sits within our membership, right? We also have structured programs. We do training across industries. So any industry that is a very energy intensive industry that would like to transition, we have a lot of training programs available for them. We also host two conferences, which are flagship conference. The first one is the Asia Clean Energy Summit, which we've been running for the last 10 years. And it's, as the name suggests, Asia. So we try to gather all what's happening in Asia. A lot of information that we get is very Western centric and what's going on in that part of the world. But we like to shine a light on what's happening in Asia, sometimes even ASEAN, in terms of energy transition, in terms of the connectivity, how we can come to, import and export of power, and many other such topics, whatever is driving the clean energy transition at that given point of time. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about that.
Yeah, so I love that you pointed to the fact that we get a lot of our energy transition information from the West. But that was what I found so fascinating about the survey, because it really kind of gathered the temperature of the region, so to speak, about their journey into decarbonization. So let's talk a little bit about the survey and some of the roadblocks that were highlighted by the respondents. Most of them pointed to regulatory uncertainty, and that was quite interesting to me, because most respondents are seeing regulatory uncertainty as the biggest roadblock to ASEAN's energy transition. Help unpack that for us, Kavita. I mean, why are governments struggling to provide stable regulatory environments to enable faster energy transition?
Right. So just a couple of words about the survey. This is, we do this survey every year to just get a temperature of what's happening in our field, in our industry, both in Singapore and in the region as well, because as you know, most of our companies in Singapore also have projects in the region, right? We are such a small country, that all our companies go out, and but the bulk of the response has come from the Singapore based respondents, about 80% from here and 20% from the region. It was a very organic survey. We wanted to survey our members, our networks, our partners in the region. So that's what it is. So I think the regulatory framework is very important, and it's evolving. If you look at the oil and gas industry, it took them how many, tens of decades to really get established and establish all the standards, regulation, verification standards. So I guess it's a very evolving landscape. But at the same time, our industry is purely driven by policies and regulations, because this is something that the governments need to set the criteria very clearly, because that's when the investments can flow. If I'm an investor, I really want some certainty. If I'm coming to, let's say, invest in Malaysia, what is the policy? Is it stable? Is it going to change? How much should I invest, etc., etc. So that's what we hear when we talk to our members, and even in the survey, that financing will flow if there is very, very clear guidelines, and it's stable. It doesn't change. Sometimes, with political changes in the various countries, some of the directions change. So that can be a little bit worrisome for a developer, for example. So that's why you see a lot of people saying they want stable policies. Yeah,
that's right. Well, so it's not just the regulatory environment that's important; it's also the economic environment. Some of the respondents pointed to the fact that some governments may be placing economic recovery above or ahead of their energy transition goals. How do we think about that? Are governments sacrificing long-term sustainability in favor of short-term economic gains, which is, part of their mandate, right? They need to see some economic growth, particularly in hard economic times. But my question is, why is it that most governments don't see sustainability and renewables as part of the solution to economic instability?
Yeah, I think you're very right. Very often, and we've seen it very recently, not just in our part of the world, the bulk of which is developing a world, but even in the developed world. If you saw Europe switching back to gas and nuclear and all those things, because these are bread and butter issues. We have to keep our economies running. But I guess it's a very and it's a balance between, like we say, security and the economics as well as the sustainability. So it's a balance which every government has to strike, and every country is different, every government policies are different. So I think it's a very country by country approach, where it's the bread and butter issues are front and center. Then sometimes energy transition takes a little bit of a backseat. It's also the economics of it. In some countries, there are a lot of natural resources, which could be fossil fuel based. So the governments are also looking at how to, in a sustainable way, maybe access those resources, because those would probably be the cheapest for them. But the good news is, and our message as an association is, that the renewable energy prices have dropped tremendously, even below the cost of the fossil fuel prices, fossil fuel powered electricity prices. So solar, as an example, in many, many countries is below, a fossil fuel powered electricity. So sometimes I think it's also a matter of more awareness, capacity building, looking at it as a long-term goal, in a carbon constrained world that we are going to live in, which is pretty evident from all the various signals that we are seeing, And that's why if you look at Singapore government, they have said that Singapore wants to be net zero by 2050. And just by sending that big message, it has really moved the needle. The companies are now looking at it more seriously. The policies are being put in place. And still we see a little bit of pessimism if you see the survey from some of our companies. And that is because at the moment we are at about 7 to 8% from renewables, and we need to get to 100%. So it's completely understandable that some companies think that this is a task which is, it's too high a bar that the government has set for themselves. But I think when we see in terms of how the policies are being rolled out, like you look at the carbon tax, you look at the Energy Conservation Act, there's a lot that has been the green mark scheme for buildings. Every other month we see a new initiative by the government, both in terms of legislations but also in terms of encouraging the companies, especially when it comes to SMEs.
Right. Okay, so let's zoom in on Singapore. I mean, the results of the survey pointed to ranked Singapore as the leader in driving net zero efforts in ASEAN. Malaysia comes second, but let's take a look at some of the successes and also the challenges that Singapore faces in its energy transition journey. Where would you say are the biggest gaps when it comes to decarbonization efforts for Singapore, for instance?
So Singapore is very unique, right? We are like a city country we are really, natural resources or renewable resources constrained country. We have no land space to build solar parks or hydrogen plants and things like that. So I think Singapore, that's the biggest challenge, and so we have to work within that limitation and innovate and ensure. So the Singapore has the 4 switch strategy when it comes to energy transition. The first switch is solar, which means we are going to solar all the surfaces in Singapore, whether it's roof, it's reservoirs, it's the building integrated surfaces. So find every surface that we could put solar on, new and innovative solar. That's one. The second strategy is to adopt low carbon technologies, and this will keep evolving. It could be green hydrogen, it could be battery storage, it could be many other new technologies that are on the drawing board. The third switch again is energy efficiency, where we really look at, actually energy efficiency is not a switch, but it's across the board. Make sure that every electron is being used appropriately, because it's a precious resource for us. The third switch is actually energy imports, and maybe we should talk about that a bit more. And the last one, of course, gas would be our, natural gas, which is the cleanest fossil fuel, would be our transition fuel, as we go along. So that's the broad strategy. And each of that pillar is being worked on very actively. And we as an association come in and support and bring in the industry point of view, whether it's at a conference, Clean Energy Conference, which we are hosting 22nd to the 24th of October as part of the Singapore International Energy Week. In fact, this year we are also launching the Asia Carbon Summit for the first time, because we think the carbon reduction, decarbonization, carbon markets, all these issues are very, very important if we have to meet a net zero goal. And this is something that we are also bringing in regional participants, because Singapore can't do it alone. We need the support of all our neighboring countries, and especially in the ASEAN, I think all the 10 countries need to work very closely together to achieve that type of goal for not just Singapore, but for every country.
Right. Well, I want to talk to you about Singapore's carbon pricing and trading mechanism. I mean, when you took the temperature of the industry about this, what were the kind of the feedback coming from respondents? What did they have to say?
Yeah. So as you know, Singapore is the first country in Asia to put the carbon tax. And I think what that does is, and we started with just $5, and with just recently has gone up to $25 per ton. And this carbon tax is only applicable to the 40 largest emitters. So the footprint is rather limited in terms of the corporates, but actually it's about 80% of Singapore's emissions. So it shows you the profile, that there are few companies that are the largest emitters. So that's why when you see that, we ask them what is the impact of carbon tax, what came across is that they were not that impacted by it.
Okay.
Because it's only those 40 companies that are getting impacted. And secondly, I think Singapore laid down its carbon pricing act very clearly, a few years ago, where the companies were even told what the tax would be and how it will increase over the years.
Right.
So the companies who are large emitters have been preparing for it, and the government is giving a lot of incentives to these companies to actually prepare for paying this carbon tax, or make internal changes to reduce, because I think government is not so interested in the tax money from the carbon tax, but it is to change behavior, you
Okay.
know
All right.
and because of this, it sends message not just to those 40 companies, but also to companies down the ladder, right? That and the government has said that we will continue to evaluate this, and there is a lot of programs that are going on even to help the SME sector, and we are very active in that, because SMEs, that is, while there are bigger industries that are hard to abate, petrochemicals, chemicals, steel, etc., but SMEs form a big part of the industrial ecosystem. So as an association, we are trying to help these SMEs. We've set up a digital platform called the DigiLeap, which is going to be a marketplace where the demand and supply can meet, which
Right.
means we are going to get all the companies that are looking for sustainability services or sustainable energy services on the same platform as the people who are offering the solutions, technical, financial, even things like training, etc.
Right.
we
Kavita, sorry, just to jump in there. When you speak to the SMEs, what do they tell you of their biggest challenges? What is it that they need? What kind of support are they seeking?
I think firstly, they don't find that there's any driver for them to do it, right? There's no legislation. They are listening to a lot of things. They are attending, they're reading in the newspapers every day. They are attending some maybe trainings or seminars, etc., that we host. But I think the real change is coming when I speak to SMEs who are suppliers to, let's say, some larger company sitting in Europe, and that company is requiring them to green themselves, like greening the supply chain kind of concept. So I think it has to be a driver either from the buyers or from the government, or a carbon pricing mechanism. But we are encouraging SMEs to take small baby steps and not wait for a point where they have to do it. And we are getting some good kind of traction, both on the platform which we'll be launching soon, as well as doing our training. We do get some SMEs attending the training as well.
Right.
So yeah, so that's kind of part of our work.
Right. So you have to kind of get everyone on board to be able to see big results or to make a big difference in achieving net zero. So when we think about Singapore's ambitions to become, say, a carbon trading hub, what needs to happen to make those ambitions realized? Right now is now the right time for to bring carbon trading to maturity.
Right. So, I mean, as you know, Singapore is sort of already the hub for financial services, legal services. There's verification, certification, and already we are a big commodity trading hub as well, right? Of different commodities. So, carbon is just another commodity that needs to be traded. But what is the roadblock right now is there's not enough volume, of carbon projects that are happening. You have to create those carbon credits before you can trade them, right?
Right.
We also have digital exchanges. There are some 2-3 of them are our members, where you can log the carbon, you can trade it, you can retire it. But I think as the demand for carbon will grow, like let's say from the tech companies that, if you look at all the technology companies who have big data centers, and with the artificial intelligence, there will be even more need for these data centers, and they need to neutralize their carbon footprint. The more and more demand is coming for carbon. But I think that's one barrier. The other thing is, I think there needs to be more transparency and measurement in terms of the carbon industry, more stricter, more transparent standards, more verification, because there have been some sort of bad cases where, and we don't want that one apple to spoil the whole industry, because as a concept it works very well, because the capital flows to these projects which otherwise would not have been possible, if they are carbon reduction projects. So the carbon credit value makes these projects viable, you know. But there's not enough of them right now. We think that will happen, and Singapore is well positioned. So in the meantime, that's why the government has imposed carbon tax, and only 5% of your tax liability you can set off by carbon credits. But they have given very strict guidance of what type of carbon credits will be accepted.
Okay, so coming back to the role of kind of the region in maybe helping this market reach maturity or come to the point where there's enough momentum, there's enough volume for it to reach maturity. How do we think about that in a regional perspective? I mean, Europe has done it quite well when it comes to regional carbon trading. Is that something that can be applied to the ASEAN region, you think?
Yes. So again, I think we circle back to the regulation and policies, for more of these projects to happen. So the carbon market can only be thriving if there are enough carbon projects. So if you look at Europe, because it's a compliance market, the EU ETS, EU, European Union Emission Trading Scheme, is a compliance market. So the companies have been given a certain quota for carbon. So if, let's say, government impose those kind of restrictions on the companies, if you emit more than this, you'll be taxed, or you have to set it off, like what Singapore is doing in a way. So that would really drive the carbon market. But again, we completely understand that every country is at a different stage of development, and there's no one size fits all. And that's why we have started these conversations at the Asia Carbon Summit, where we are inviting participants from all the countries in Asia, as many as we can find who are doing something. In fact, we've invited a single buyer from Malaysia, to also talk about what's happening in Malaysia, so that the conversations can start, and that's when the projects will happen.
Okay.
We can understand what are the bottlenecks in each country at a more granular level. I'm talking more on sort of the top level, regulation, financing, but we need to get our hands dirty, get into the nitty gritty of it, and what will make it work.
Right. Well, that's interesting, because Malaysia is going to be chair of ASEAN for 2025. So, and also the government of Malaysia, the Ministry of Industry, of Investment and Industry, has already said that they are planning to look into carbon pricing to facilitate carbon trading, and also look into carbon tax. How should we take kind of lessons from Singapore and from kind of the best practices around the world to accelerate regional cooperation, or even domestic, the domestic journey for energy transition? What's your thinking? Are there considerations that really need to be prioritized as we think about accelerating energy transition?
Right. So as you said, it's the trade and investment has to continue. So we have to balance between the economic development as well as decarbonization, because if we just go one way or go the other way, it doesn't work, right? I mean, I know there's a lot of urgency to do something in this area. So I think just the announcement of that carbon pricing policy sends a very good message. And I would say Malaysia could look at the way Singapore did it. We gave a lot of time to the companies to adapt, you know. It's not like we announce it today and then, you know, 6 months down the road, you have to start implementing and start slow, you know. Let them test the waters, let them do small projects, you know. And that's what builds up the confidence. And then on the other hand, don't look at this carbon tax as an income for the government. Look at it as a money that needs to be plowed back into the industry, you know, to really help them. Because Melissa, this is new grounds, new uncharted territories for every country, you know. So we really need to handhold the industry. I mean, you know, again, the economy goes up and down and it impacts our industry. We want our industry to thrive, but at the same time, we want them to also do the right things, you know, in a way that they can manage, you know, and not wait too long. Otherwise, it may be too late.
Yes, for sure. Kavita, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing some of your observations, your insights with us. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for having me.
That was Kavita Gandhi from the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.